Okay, in this tutorial we're going to look at how different factions of Russian society reacted to the rule of the provisional government in its opening months. During March and April of 1917, the provisional government officially ruled Russia, whilst the Petrograd Soviet acted as a sort of watchdog to protect the interests of workers and soldiers, and to guard against any attempt to return to the old Tsarist ways. The Soviet had 3,000 members and was not dominated by a particular political party. In the opening days, Tsarist officials were rounded up, arrested and imprisoned, and the secret police was disbanded. And there was initially an air of optimism, and it looked like stability had been restored, and even the Bolsheviks had agreed to support the provisional government in its earlier months. So we'll go through different sections of society. On the left-hand side here, we've got the different actions that the provisional government took, and then on the right-hand side, in the pink box, we have the peasant or that sections of society's reaction to those changes. So with regards to peasants, the provisional government set up committees to collect information on land holding. This was seen as a preparatory way to, in preparation for the redistribution of land, which the Petrograd Soviet were anxious to call for, but they'd agreed not to during this dual authority and this what was known as this uneasy compromise. The provisional government had also set up a new grain scheme which secured higher payments for grain providers and producers in rural parts of Russia. This made sure that grain producers and farmers were being paid well for their grain, and there was even some stockpiling just to make sure that rural peasants were being paid for what they were producing. And in support of the war effort, wartime conscription continued in the opening months of the provisional government. So how did peasants react to this? They were frustrated at the lack of land redistribution. It's something they dreamed about, and something that they hoped would happen as soon as the Tsar had abdicated. That wasn't the case, and as a result they became a little frustrated. As a result, there were some violent seizures of land from the nobility and these wealthy kulaks in various parts of rural Russia. These uprisings or these seizures were encouraged by radical influences and party members in rural Russia. And unfortunately, the provisional government gained the reputation as being the middle class, representative of the middle classes and remnants of the old ruling class, and out of touch with the needs of peasants. So workers, again, the provisional government had set up factory committees. They called them Soviets, but they weren't the full-blown Soviets, and they were set up to represent workers' interests. And they supported employers' efforts to restore discipline and secure an 8-hour working day. Obviously, striking was rife at this point, so the provisional government wanted to support employers in providing a secure workforce to maintain production in these earlier months. So, how did workers react? The Soviets, the actual Petrograd Soviets, created a greater sense of worker solidarity. They actually became the real barometer and the real forum for workers to voice their opinions, and so the Soviets were much more in touch with the needs of workers than any representative from the provisional government. Food shortages, inflation and unemployment continued to prompt strikes. There was over 175,000 strikes in June alone. And factory owners were similarly disappointed because they just simply felt the provisional government were not doing enough. And finally, soldiers. The provisional government set up soldiers' committees, and aristocratic controls were reduced. This had been taking place anyway, as non-noble recruits ended up being middle-ranking officers, but the provisional government did try to speed that process up. Other than that, there was little immediate change. And so the reaction of soldiers was a huge increase in desertion in the opening months of the provisional government. Over 365,000 desertions took place in these months, and this was this was much higher even than the number of desertions during the October Revolution. So there was a real spike in desertions in this time, and soldiers interpreted Order Number 1 as a right to completely ignore the rules and the decisions of the provisional government if the Petrograd Soviet disagreed with it. Order Number 1 had basically stated that the Petrograd Soviet had overall authority of the army, and they took that, and then the soldiers took that as, well, we don't need to really listen to the provisional government.